Hey, Spuddies, PotatoMcWhiskey here, and welcome to my June update Pantheon tier list. I don't really like the word tier list, but I think it's a perfectly reasonable way to describe it. It's basically me going through and ranking and considering each of the new and updated Pantheons and sort of grading them in a vacuum. So we're just going to start from the top of the list. We're going to go down through alphabetical. And I'm going to go ahead and explain how the grading system works and how the scores work. And then we'll go through my notes and we'll talk about each of the Pantheons in turn. Okay, so the grading system works on a consistency and strength score. So consistency and strength is measured from 1 to 5. And for strength, it means a score of 1 means that it has a very low impact on the outcome of the game. A strength of 5 means it has a very high impact on the outcome of the game. A strength of 3 means it has like a pretty okay impact on the outcome of the game. And similarly, for the consistency, it means that a score of 1 means that it's very situational. A lot of things have to go right in order for this Pantheon to be useful. Did I accidentally delete this? Oh, I did. Whoops. Anyway, and then a 5 means that it's always helping. So in the consistency score, a 5 means that it's always helping you win the game. Now, how these things combine matters. So let's say you had something that has a really, really, really high impact. It's a score of 5 on the strength scale. Well, if it has a score of 1 on the consistency scale, it means it's a super game-defining bonus. But it doesn't happen very often that it's really actually useful. And you can have the other way. You could have something that's like super always really impactful, or it's always impactful, but its impact is pretty low. And there's some examples of this. And then you might have like a score of like, let's imagine that a score of 3-3 is like an average Pantheon. This is like a Pantheon that is pretty consistent and pretty impactful on the outcome of the game. So hopefully this explains how the grades go. And then there's an extra grade called the fun graph, where I basically go through and we kind of make a decision about how fun we find each of the Pantheons. This is like a very, very subjective graph. I actually made this Pantheon tier list while streaming on twitch.tv/PotatoMcWhiskey while listening and talking with my chat and stuff like that. If you want to catch me over there, go ahead and do so. So we're going to start off at the top here. We've got City Patron Goddess. This gives you plus 25% production towards districts in cities without a specialty district. So this is one of the Pantheons that falls into the I'm not going for a religion and I have a Pantheon and I want to get value from my Pantheon. That's like the category. And there's a few Pantheons that fit in there. So example, one of them would be the City Patron Goddess. Another one would be fertility rites. And then another one would be religious settlements. These are just Pantheons that you have a Pantheon, but you don't care about a religion game, so you just pick these up because you want to get a little bit of value. City Patron Goddess is like really, really consistent, but it's not that strong. 25% production is fairly small. 25% production, especially when you consider the total amount of production that's going to be giving you is fairly small because you're typically building your first specialty district pretty early into the game. When production costs are fairly low. It is nice because it does mean, like, let's say if it were to take 10 turns to build a district, you'll get it 2 turns sooner, right? It's like a 20% production discount on a district, which is pretty nice. It's not too bad. So I would give this a grade of 10, which is like somewhere between a score of like a 9 and a 12 is like an average strength Pantheon. And like you might say like, so I'd say somewhere between like 8 and 12 is like a decently okay Pantheon. These are like Pantheons that are pickable. They're not game defining. They're just okay. And I would describe City Patron Goddess as easily just an okay Pantheon that, again, if you're just not going for religion and you still want to get value out of your Pantheon, you take this one. Then we've got Dance of the Aurora. This is the first sort of I'm going for a religion game and I want extra faith Pantheon. Now, it doesn't have to be a religion game that you're going for, but you do need to build holy sites to get value out of this. So it can apply to multiple different victory types, but it's typically going to be more useful if you're including religion in your win condition. This is quite strong, I would say. The extra adjacency is very easy to take advantage of, and it's quite powerful. You can easily get up to like a +6, sometimes +8, depending on like how your adjacency is working and whether or not you have the Holy Site card. And you can even get up to +12 faith per turn per Holy Site if you are, for example, Russia. Russia is really, really strong with the Dance of the Aurora, as is Canada, because both of them, I believe, have Tundra biases. So they're more likely to spawn in Tundra and therefore more likely to be able to take advantage of the Tundra Pantheon. It's a really, really solid Pantheon that mostly applies to Tundra starts. And a sort of similar sort of thing applies for Desert Folklore. I would argue that Desert Folklore is a little bit less consistent because you're less likely going to want to settle Desert, because I would argue that Desert is weaker than Tundra because it doesn't have any yields, it doesn't have any forests, it doesn't have any stuff like that. And Desert is a little bit less common on the map, right? There's just, in my experience, there's usually big chunks of Tundra that you can take advantage of, but if you're a save who spawns near a desert, the desert is typically like pretty small and localized, whereas Tundra tends to be a very large area of the map that you can take advantage of, so you're much more likely to be able to get value out of the Dance of the Aurora. So even though these are basically the same Pantheon, just the differences between how Desert and Tundra works kind of changes the score. So I would argue that Dance of the Aurora is better, but obviously, like, if you're in a desert, you're not just going to pick Dance of the Aurora just because I graded Dance of the Aurora better, right? It just means that in order for you to get the same value, the strength value of 4 here, you need to be in the right situation to be able to do that. Like, obviously, if you spawn near a desert, you're going to take Desert Folklore over a Dance of the Aurora, right? And then we have our first, like, I would say tier 1, like S tier Pantheon that's like really, really, really strong and has actually been kind of nerfed, kind of buffed, and that's Divine Spark. Divine Spark is like a super powerful Pantheon, because it is really, really flexible. It's really, really consistent and really, really flexible, and it provides a bonus that has a lot of value. So this is really good if you're going for any sort of religion game. If you place down a Holy Site and you want to get your religion and you want to do it without having to work too many Holy Site projects, you plug in Divine Spark. You can either stick with a religion game, go full in with a religion game. Now that Great People points, when all of the Great People of a category are gone, they are now converted into faith. This is even better because it's essentially +1 faith from your holy sites, from your shrines, and from your temples. So like, if you fully build a holy site in a city, this Pantheon essentially gives you +3 faith, which is really, really powerful. So it's really, really powerful for a religion victory. It's also pretty handy for either a science victory, because you get the extra great scientist points. Do keep in mind now, in order to get full value out of this Pantheon, you do actually have to build a library. Now, typically when you do build a campus, you are going to build a library like quickly afterwards, but I think it's just going to mean that it has a similar power level to how it used to be, but it just takes a little bit longer for that power to come online. So I'd still say it's easily one of the top wonders, and the same sort of applies for the theater square. You need to build the amphitheater to get the full value of it. It's still a really good and really strong wonder. It's great for religion games, it's great for science games, and it's great for tourism games because you get those extra Great People points generation. It also combos really well with like Pingala, who can give you 100% Great People point generation, all that sort of stuff, and even the Oracle too. Okay, now we've got Earth Goddess. Earth Goddess gives you +2 faith from tiles with Breathtaking appeal. Breathtaking is any tile which has appeal of 4 or more. Now this used to be, I believe, +1 faith from Charming or better, which I think was +2. So technically this has been nerfed in that it's going to be more situational. It's going to give you its bonus less often, but it's also been buffed in the sense that it's going to give you a better yield when it does apply. I would argue that overall, this is a little bit weaker than the previous iteration of it in the early game, and then it's easily a lot stronger in the late game because in the late game you have much more control over what the appeal of your tiles actually is, because you can plant forests, you can plant down districts that give appeal, all that sort of stuff. You can build wonders. This is incredibly strong if you're going for a tourism game with any emphasis on national parks, where you're going to be building forests, you're going to be laying down national parks, because then you can work those tiles for the extra Faith. It's also really, really, really strong if you pair it with the Eiffel Tower. So again, it applies mostly to a tourism game. Really, really strong Pantheon. It's also a lot of fun. I think this is easily one of the most fun Pantheons to use, as is the Desert and Dance of the Aurora Pantheons. I didn't talk about the fun rating just yet. But yeah, easily one of my favorite Pantheons to use, and it's really, 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 really strong. Then we've got fertility rites. This is one of the Pantheons that has perfect consistency, and what that means is that it's always applying, it's always helping you. It's just that the amount of help that it gives you is a little bit lower. It's not that great. Like, it's not. It's a good Pantheon. The free builder is very, very useful. It's a bonus builder, actually. That's important to make that distinction. Whenever you build a builder, the cost of your next builder goes up. So this is not quite as good as a free builder, but it is a bonus builder. So you don't actually have to pay that production cost for that builder, and you can always make use of it. This is another one of those Pantheons that is like, I'm not going for a religion or faith game, but I want to get value from my Pantheon. Fertility rites, it's going to let you grow a little bit quicker, which means you work your tiles a little bit sooner. And it's also going to give you that free builder, which will make your life a little bit easier. Then we've also got, I would say it's a decently good Pantheon. Like this is a decently good Pantheon. It's not an amazing Pantheon, it's decently good. Then we have Fire Goddess, which is +2 faith from geothermal fissures and volcanic soil. I would argue that this is fairly situational. You need to have geothermal fissures, and you need to have a volcano that has erupted and created volcanic soil. And none of those things are guaranteed. However, if you do have the sort of land and situation for that, it's really good. The extra faith is really, really powerful because you get the faith whether or not those tiles are improved. You can't actually improve geothermal fissures until late into the game. And volcanic soil tiles are often worth working even without Fire Goddess. So Fire Goddess, just like if you plan to work at like 4 or 5 of those tiles in your empire, I would say it's worth it to pick up Fire Goddess. That's a decent amount of faith applying to your empire from the start of the game, which could help snowball you a little bit. I would say on the whole, it's just a solid, good Pantheon. Like it's like an average power Pantheon, right? It's an 8 out of 25, and if you imagine like 9 is like the perfect median. It's kind of a weird rating system. I know some people had like some criticisms of it. I would say this is like just slightly below average, but it's also a lot of fun to use. So I think this is a really, really good Pantheon. Fire Goddess, I think, is a good Pantheon. It's not great, it's not bad, it's just good. It's like solid. Then we have the God of the Craftsman, which is +1 production and +1 faith from improved strategic resources. This is a pretty fun Pantheon to use. You get a little bit of extra production and faith on your horses. It applies to horses, it applies to niter, it applies to iron, it applies to every strategic resources, oil, uranium, aluminum, all of them get +1 production and faith. So it's fairly consistent, right? And it grows in power as the game goes on. Well, it kind of grows and weakens in power because, you know, you can make the argument that as the game goes on, it applies to more tiles. And then you could also make the argument that as the game on, the relative amount that this is giving you compared to your total empire production is weakening. So it gets stronger in the sense that you're getting more value out of it, but it gets weaker in the sense that the amount of value you get out of it matters less. But overall, I would say this is a really solid Pantheon. You're often going to have at least like maybe 3 to 5 tiles in your empire, unless you get really, really unlucky. You're going to have 3 to 5 tiles in your empire that you're going to take advantage of this. Production is really useful. Faith is pretty useful. This is a strong Pantheon. It's really consistent as well. I think it's easily like not like if it's not A tier, it's like B tier. It's like one step down from the best. It's just a good, really, really good Pantheon. Then we've got God of Healing. This is a little bit of a weaker Pantheon in my opinion. It's +30 healing in your holy site and adjacent city tiles, or adjacent tiles rather. It's a very situational Pantheon. Its impact is reasonably strong because what it can do is help you keep up momentum. Let's say you're conquering someone like Arabia and they've built a whole bunch of holy sites, so they have those laying around. After you conquer them, you can sort of park your army on the holy site and heal up a couple turns, 2 to 3 turns faster, which means you get to go to the next city a couple turns sooner and start taking that down. So in a sense, it's really good for keeping up momentum. If you do go for a religion, it's actually really well paired with something like Crusades. Crusades and God of Healing, attacking another religion civ. You can very, very easily completely knock them down in like a few turns just by using the combination of the higher combat strength and the ability to heal essentially instantly using the God of the Healing. It is I'd actually argue that it's a little bit more fun. And maybe a 1 score was a little bit of an unfair rating on it. I would say it's a fun Pantheon to use. It's a little weak and it's a little situational. But when you can make it work for you, it's a lot of fun and it makes the game very interesting to play. Easily the weakest Pantheon in the list now, I would say, but still in its own like unique situation where it is useful, it's still good. Then we have the God of the Forge here. This is plus 25% production towards ancient and classical military units. This is another one of those tier 1 A, S tier sort of best Pantheons in the game. With the removal of Goddess of the Harvest, which was like in a tier of its own. Kind of everything has been squished towards the middle, which is overall better for balance. But God of the Forge is still here, holding the top spot alongside some of the other Pantheons. It's... situationally, I'd argue that this is really, really overpowered. I would say you only really want to pick this in a few situations. So you only really want to pick this if you are going for an early war. That's obviously situational caveat 1. I've lost my train of thought. You want to be going for an early war, or you want to be defending from an early war and you need to build units. I would argue that this is better if you're on the attack. The 25% production might not seem like much, but again, imagine it as if it's a 20% production discount on your units. So units are 20% off, right? So for every 4 units you build, you can build an extra one. So that's like 20% discount, right? So this is a pretty good one. Situationally overpowered with civilizations like Macedon, who have a lot of really strong early game unique units that they can use to roll over other civilizations. Usually, most of the time, it's just a good, like, if you're in a situation like, I'm playing an early warmonger civ and I'm close enough to someone to kill them, I'm going to pick this up so I can build my army faster, right? That's a reasonable thing to do. God of the Forge, it's a solid early war Pantheon. It kind of fits into the category of like, I'm not going for a religion or faith game, but I want to get value from my Pantheon and I'm going for war. So that's when you want to pick this. It's actually powerful enough that I would argue that even if you weren't planning on going for a war and you get this, like, say in the first 20 to 30 turns ish, like 20, I'd say 20 to 35 ish turns, you can pick this up and be like, oh yeah, I'm going to go to war now. Like, that's how good this is. This can be like game defining in the sense that it can help you make a decision about what you want to do in the early game. So that's why I consider it like so highly powerful. It's about a 4 on the consistency because it applies to a big chunk of the important part of the game, and its bonus is pretty powerful, but it does stop applying later on, so you kind of have to actually take advantage of it for it to matter. Then we've got God of the Open Sky, which gives you +1 culture from Pantheons. This is just another one of those sort of solid, above average Pantheons. It's quite good. It is reliant on having pastures, which are pretty common, but it's not quite like, it's not like you're going to have the +1 culture in every single city in your empire. It's more likely that you're going to have somewhere in the region of 4 to 7 pastures across your entire empire. However, the +1 culture is a quite nice yield because pastures are often worth building anyway. Stuff like horses, stuff like sheep, stuff like cattle. Oftentimes those are still worth improving because they're 4 yield. Like, once you improve them with a pasture, they go from like 3 food to 3 food 1 production, or 2 food 3 production, or whatever it is. These are just like, pastures are already good, so improving pastures is nice, and then improving pastures with culture is really, really nice. I would argue that they're best for non-tourism games where you don't plan to build theater squares, but you need like a little bit of extra culture to get you through the game. That would be when I would argue that the God of the Open Sky is a worthy Pantheon. Then we've got God of the Sea, which is kind of what I would consider like an average everyman Pantheon. It's good and it's consistent. However, it is reliant on a few different things. It relies on the fact that you are going to be settling coastal. It also relies on the fact that you're actually going to be improving your coastal resources, and it relies on the fact that So you have to be settling coastal, you have to have coastal resources, and you have to be improving them. So those are kind of like things that are knocks against it. I'd also argue that coastal cities are also just a little bit weaker in general. But the God of the Sea Pantheon kind of makes up for the weakness of the coastal cities, because coastal cities, they tend to have lower production. They tend to have lower production but higher gold income, which I would argue is just weaker than, say, a landlocked city. So overall, I would say this is just a solid pick if you're coastal. It's not like a mind-blowing Pantheon, but it's good. It's decent. It's pickable, right? It's pickable. And I would argue that almost every Pantheon in the game now is actually pretty pickable. With the removal of Goddess of the Harvest, a lot of these are looking a lot better now. There still are a couple that are kind of, I'm not so sure about that. And it's kind of, they're only okay. I would argue that God of the Sea is like one of those, it's okay Pantheons, because there are things in the game that do what it does better already. Like the is it Toronto that gives you, no, it's not Toronto, it's one of the city states gives you +1 production from shallow water and then another +1 at the industrial age, which is kind of like arguably just a better God of the Sea Pantheon. Then we've got God of War, which gives you bonus faith equal to 50% of the strength of each unit killed within 8 tiles of a holy site. This is a pretty decent Pantheon. I would argue that it's sort of on the weaker end of the scale of this power level. Like, maybe you could argue that it should be a 3 and a 3. It's reasonably consistent though, as long as you're going to war with people who do have religions. That would be when this is actually when I think it's best, is when you yourself have not built any holy sites and you yourself have not gone for a religion, but you plan to kill another religion civ. This can be a good pickup, because what it means is that any kills that you make in their territory will allow you to get faith, which when you combine that with Grandmaster's Chapel and the extra faith from pillaging, and then you have like the cards plugged in so your pillaging yields are higher and stuff like that, this can end up, especially now that I believe more tiles give you faith when you pillage, if I recall correctly. Like, faith and gold is much more common to pillage, so you'll be able to actually keep up your war momentum by when you kill units you get a little bit of faith, and when you pillage you get a little bit of faith, which means you'll be able to purchase more units, you'll be able to purchase great people, purchase great generals. It's just a solid sort of, I want to go to war with it's just a solid, I want to go war with another civ who has a religion kind of thing. And it also kind of works, I believe, on barbarian units too. So, you know, if you find a barbarian encampment or a barbarian outpost near an enemy city early in the game, they've built a holy site, this is going to be a pretty decent one to pick up. Now we move on to Goddess of the Festivals. This is +1 culture from Plantations. This one has been combined with, I can't remember what the name of the other one was, but it used to be +1 food from certain plantations, and now it's just +1 culture from all plantations. I would argue that this is sort of on par with God of the Open Sky, but very, very slightly better, because there tends to be more plantations on the map. The one downside that I would give this is that plantation tiles are often a little bit harder to justify working. They tend to not have a lot of production on them. They tend to be heavily focused on like food, faith, gold, and culture and science, these sorts of things. And they tend to lack production, which makes them harder to justify working. But giving them an extra culture makes them much more workable. I think the other one was oral tradition. Yeah, makes the other ones a little bit more workable, which I think is a reasonable Pantheon. This is what I would consider like a solid Pantheon. This is a Pantheon you can pick and get value out of. All you got to do is look around your line and say, oh, I've got like, you know, I've got 6 plantation resources over there. I've got 4 over here. I'm going to get 10 culture per turn throughout the entire game off this. I'll get 2 right now because I've already got these 2 improved. I would say the one downside of this one over pastures is that pastures come online a little bit earlier, and pastures are more workable. So I would say if you had like an equal amount of plantations and pastures, I would go for the pasture one over the plantation one, purely just because plantations are easier to work and they are easier to get online. However, I do think that the culture from plantations is a little bit stronger, purely due to the fact that I think that plantations are just a little bit more common on the map. And now we move on to Goddess of the Hunt. This is +1 food and +1 production from camps. This is a solid early game Pantheon. Typically, you might run into like 2 to 3 camps in your empire. Very rarely you'll have like 6 to 7 camps in your empire. That's really, really powerful, and you're going to get a lot of value out of that. I would argue that it's better if you're starting in Tundra, and I would say it's good if you're starting in Tundra and you're not planning to take advantage of any religion stuff. So it kind of fits into that category of it's good when you're not going for a religion or faith game, but you want to get value from a Pantheon. But this is, I would argue that this is more geared towards Tundra, because camps are reasonably common in Tundra, and camps tend to be camp tiles like deer and stuff like that. Deer and furs tend to be your best tiles that you can work in Tundra. So making them even better and making them more workable is just a nice little bonus. Overall, a solid Pantheon. It's decent. It's good. It's not mind blowing. It's not amazing. It's just a solid, good Pantheon. Then we've got initiation rights here. This is plus 50 faith for each barbarian outpost cleared. Units fully heal when clearing barbarian outposts. I would say this is okay. If you're playing on like a really big map with a lot of barbarians, this is okay. The nice thing is barbarian encampments already give you some gold. So let's say you spawn somewhere and you see, oh god, I've got like 4 encampments around me and I have a Pantheon. I can pick this up, pick up a couple hundred faith, and then be on my way. And it'll keep up your momentum. It's another one of these Pantheons that kind of fits into the category of I'm not going for a religion game, I'm not going for any sort of faith generation, but I wouldn't mind picking up a little bit of faith along the way. So I would argue this is probably one of the weaker Pantheons in the pool, but it's still very pickable in the situation in which you're going to get value from it. Still very, very good. Very, very good if you have a bunch of barbarian encampments around you. Now, of course, not every Pantheon is going to be amazing. Like, you could argue that this should be like maybe a 2, 3, and I would very much so agree with you. Like this, you could easily put this down to like a 2, and I would agree with you. And I would say it's one of the weaker Pantheons, in my opinion. It's not amazing. Then we have Lady of the Reeds and Marshes. This gives you +1 production from marsh, oasis, and desert floodplains. This is kind of fits again into that category of this is good when you're not going for any sort of religion or faith game, but you want to get value from your Pantheon. It's a decent Pantheon. It gives you production. Production is a really valuable, easily the most valuable yield in the game, because you can turn production into other things. And it typically gives you production on tiles that don't usually have production. Desert floodplains tend to be a little bit sparse. They tend to have plenty of food, although it can depend on how many times they get flooded. Just getting that +1 food or +1 production is nice. Marshes are something I would argue that you want to clear out. However, with the Lady of the Reeds and Marshes, with the Lady of the Reeds and Marshes Pantheon, marsh essentially becomes like a improved cattle pasture on grassland, which is a 3 food 1 production tile, which is a solid workable tile in the early game. Oasis similarly becomes like a 3-1-2 tile, 3 food 1 production 2 gold tile. I can't remember Oasis off the top of my head, but it just makes all of these tiles much more workable. I would definitely consider picking this if you were a civ who spawns in desert near a river and you're not planning to take desert folklore. It kind of fits into that similar category as Goddess of the Hunt does for Tundra. I would argue that Lady of the Reeds and Marshes kind of fits that same niche, but for desert cities that aren't going for any religions. Then we've got Monument to the Gods. This is a pretty situational wonder, I would argue. It's very consistent in that it gives you that 15% production, but it's pretty low impact. Although I will say one thing, early wonders tend to be more important than later wonders, and early wonders tend to have bigger impacts on the total outcome of the game than later wonders. So having them apply to early wonders is really, really nice. It's another one of these categories that fits into, again, like a lot of the Pantheons now are good for, I'm not going for a religion or faith game, but I want a Pantheon, and the Pantheon that I'm going to pick is this one because it's going to help me do this XYZ. It really combos well with the one government, is it autocracy or, oh god, I can't remember it off the top of my head. Yeah, autocracy gives you plus 10% production towards wonders, which is really, really nice. It means the total would be 25%, and then you add in the 15% social policy card. You can get up to a 50% production boost towards wonders in the early game, which is a really, really solid bonus. I would typically only pick this up if you were looking to maybe build like 3 to 5 wonders in the early game. Like if you were going for the Colosseum and the Apadana and the Great Library and the Oracle and like pyramids and Petra, like you want to be getting like a decent amount of value out of this. Otherwise, other things are going to be more powerful than this Pantheon a lot of the time. It is an okay Pantheon. It's a solid Pantheon. It's decent, but you have to know when to pick it and when you're going to get value out of it. Now we've got Religious Idols, which is +2 faith from mines over luxury and bonus resources. This is just like another one of those okay Pantheons. It's not too good, it's not too weak, it's just okay. I would argue that luxury and bonus resource that you improve with mines are pretty rare. So this is not going to apply to as many tiles as, for example, pastures or plantations. I just tend to, in my games at least, maybe this is just my experience, I tend to not have a whole lot of tiles that this is going to apply to, so I don't rate it very highly. It's an okay Pantheon. That's what I'll say. It's like, it's fine. It's a totally acceptable choice. If you have a couple of copper and a few diamond mines, this is an acceptable, maybe a bit of mercury. This is a perfectly acceptable Pantheon to pick. Then we've got Religious Settlements. This is a tier, S tier. This is an A tier or S tier Pantheon. The free settler is huge. It's I would say this has a bigger impact on multiplayer. However, being able to settle a city earlier has a lot of value. It means you get everything, like, it means you build your monument sooner. It means you build your whatever sooner. It means you build your first district sooner. It means your city grows faster. It means you get more culture, more science. Like, this is a Pantheon that I would suggest picking. Again, it kind of fits into the category of, I'm not going for a faith or religion game, but I want to get value from a Pantheon. So I'm going to pick up Religious Settlements, get that early settler. I think there is one important thing to note about this is that it actually still does increase the cost of your settlers. So it's not saving you that much production in the long run in terms of like the total amount of production you're going to spend on settlers. However, if you are spending... the main takeaway here is that you'll be able to settle your city sooner and start benefiting from that city sooner, which is a pretty reasonable Pantheon. I think this is going to be one of those Pantheons that is just like a tier A sort of, I don't want to do anything with my religion. I'm just going to take Religious Settlements so that I can drop a settler somewhere and like get going a little bit sooner. Now we've got River Goddess, which is +2 amenities and +2 housing in cities if they have a holy site adjacent to a river. This is a very strong Pantheon in my opinion. I think housing and amenities are kind of underrated a little bit. Having like a big surplus of amenities is like pretty underrated because the 10% the 10% boost to all yields, like production, science, culture, and gold is like super powerful. And +2 Pantheons is often enough to at least get you the +5 bonus, if not the +10 bonus. I would argue it has like particular synergy with civs like the Khmer, who already get bonuses from building their holy sites next to rivers, and they also get bonuses for like aqueducts and stuff like that, and they already want to grow really tall. So I'd say in those situations, this is a really, really good Pantheon. I think this is like a solid, good Pantheon if you have the land where you're going to be like, okay, I'm going to be placing my holy sites along the river. It kind of feels like this was made for, kind of feels like this Pantheon was made for the Khmer a little bit. But I would say it's a solid, pickable Pantheon. It's not game-changing, it's not amazing, it's just like good and solid. And I think I've become a little bit more... not respectful, but like I've started to appreciate the value of amenities and housing a little bit more over the last few months, I would argue. That like amenities and housing are just better than I gave them credit for. The multipliers are really, really strong, and having extra population earlier. I think the real power here is what this will allow you to do is typically it's going to let you not get housing capped and build your third district sooner. And typically you're going to only build like 2 to 3 districts per city. So if you can get this, if you're going for holy sites first, it means you'll get your next buildings like a little bit quicker. Your next district a little bit quicker in terms of population space, which allows you to lock the price in, which means you'll pay less in the long run. I think it's just a solid Pantheon. And then we've got Sacred Path. This is holy site districts get +1 faith from adjacent rainforest. This is like really kind of just okay wonder or okay Pantheon. It's decent. It's not amazing. It's better as a result of the fact that you can build lumber mills on rainforests now. Rainforests are now pretty damn solid as tiles like to keep around, because if you think now, rainforests can be boosted by lumber mills. They can be boosted by zoos. So you can have, and you can also get Chichen Itza. So you can have like rainforest sitting around that gives you like 2 to 3 food, 2 to 3 production, 2 to 3 culture, and then you're getting holy site adjacency, and then you're getting potentially gold off of them if you've got like Reina hanging around. I don't know, it's just a solid one. I think it has particular power if you're playing a civilization like Brazil. This is like a really, really, really strong Pantheon if you're playing Brazil, because you have a bias towards rainforest anyway, so you're likely to spawn in rainforest. Brazil typically doesn't mind building holy sites, so the holy site for Brazil already gets adjacency from rainforest, which is like solid. So like I think you can get up to, I think if you have like 3 to 4 rainforest beside your holy site, you can get like like 6 a base adjacency on your holy sites, and then multiply that by 100% with the holy site adjacency card. You can be getting like 12 faith per holy site in your empire as Brazil, and that's like really, really solid. I would say this is like feels like a Pantheon that was built for Brazil, but I would say with the changes to rainforest, I think any civ can kind of make them work. My only problem with it is that religion tends to be more associated with either going for a religion win, obviously, or going for a culture win, because you want to have faith. Like faith generation to me says faith or religion or culture win, right? And the problem with rainforests in a culture win is that you want to chop them out and replace them with forest, because rainforests have negative appeal. Maybe we could do with a wonder that flips that relationship, that makes rainforests give positive appeal. Like Brazil already gets that, which is kind of nice, but I feel like it's a tough thing to justify with a civ other than Brazil. And then we've got the Old Faithful Stone Circles, also known as Carl's Tier 1 S tier Pantheon. Good old Carl trying to tell me how to make my Pantheon tier list. I would say this is just like an okay Pantheon. It's a solid Pantheon. If you have a bunch of like quarries, like marble, if you have a bunch of stone hanging around and you don't want to harvest the stone, I would argue that it's still worth it to harvest stone, particularly if it's on a hill, because then you can replace it with a mine or a forest and a lumber mill. Like it's still like this. I would say this is an arguably good Pantheon. It's not amazing. It's a solid at what it does. If you want to keep your stone around, typically I would recommend harvesting stone, because it's like way more valuable being turned into other things. But quarries have been given a boost in value with this expansion too, which I think makes stone circles a little bit better. I think quarries now get more production from the tech tree instead of gold, and quarries also count for more in terms of adjacency with regards to industrial zones. So quarries are a little bit more worth keeping around. I would still argue that there's situations where you're going to want to harvest quarries, but I'd say it's still good. But yeah, I think that is the entire Pantheon tier list. I hope you guys enjoyed listening to this. I do take feedback on this, and I'm more than happy to update it if I'm presented with a good argument as to why a Pantheon should be higher, like Stone Circles, or perhaps God of the Open Sky. I'm more than happy to take your feedback. Go ahead and leave me a comment down in the comment section. I will remind you that this was recorded live on twitch.tv/PotatoMcWhiskey. We've recorded that over there with a live audience giving me commentary, and actually a lot of the decisions that we came to about the ratings of these Pantheons was made with the contribution of the people listening in chat. So I love you all very much, and I'll see you next time. Bye bye.